Welcome back to The Power of Coffee, the story about Martha, a university and undergraduate who is without a job. But along the way, she comes by one in a coffee shop run by Betty. After a while, Betty dies and Martha takes over the running of the place. She essentially becomes the owner of the place. By hard work and the stroke of fate, the coffee house becomes the hottest place in town, frequented by celebrities and all those that matter. Then Cassandra comes along. She's affluent, she's young, and she's an entrepreneur. Cassandra wants the coffee shop, but Martha doesn't want to sell. So what does she do? Cassandra buys the entire area or neighborhood where the coffee shop is situated. Martha loses the coffee shop. She loses it. But that isn't the end of the story. Join me for the next 10 pages of the story, The Power of Coffee, to make the 60th page of the novel. Let's continue. Next time, I won't ask, Lumley said. Now we are where Lumley and her mother Betty have gone to see her friend, Madeline Boyson, who works at, she owns a law firm, she's a lawyer. So she's gone to see her friend Madeline Boyson so she could help them get back, get the coffee house back into running, okay, back into action. Because the FDA, that's the Food and Drug Authority, have temporarily shut it down. So Betty and Lumley have gone to see Madeline Boyson, who is Lumley's friend and lawyer, so she could help them get the place back into action again. Let's continue the story. Next time, I won't ask, Lumley said, and then glanced at her watch. It was already 2 o'clock. She yawned into her palms, quite audibly, causing the girls to glance in her direction. She looked back at them, and they immediately looked away. It took an hour and some minutes before her chance. It took an hour and some minutes before her chance came to see Madeline. But she wasn't there when they got in. They took a seat behind her consulting table. The room was cool, the air conditioner finely tuned to give off an optimum feel. There was a water dispenser with some disposable cups in a basket. The table was bare except for a nameplate. Attorney Madeline Boyson, a small standing clock, and a single large white file that lay beside a pen holder. Okay. There was a water dispenser with some disposable cups in a basket. The table was bare, except for a nameplate, Attorney Madeline Boyson, a small standing clock, and a single large white file that lay beside a pen holder. Lumley stood up for some water, and as she drank, Madeline stepped in. She looked like she had just come out of the shower, not that her hair was wet. She appeared refreshed, happy even. And then when Lumley had exposed her face, had exposed her face by turning to see who it was that entered the room, she cried out, "Oh my God, Lumley?" Betty smiled and then got up and looked on as Lumley hurried to her, and the two began behaving like teenagers who had just found each other at a stadium full of strangers. "Why didn't you just call me, huh? Why?" Lumley said, sounding like a Brit. "I don't know. Maybe I lost your number." "Okay, why didn't you just call me, huh? Why?" Madeline said, sounding like a Brit. "I don't know. Maybe I lost your number," Lumley casually replied, and then proceeded to introduce her mother. This is my mother, Betty. Oh, nice to meet you, ma'am, Madeline said, and took her hand. It's lovely to see you, Madeline, Betty remarked. Okay. All right, straight to business. We have a problem. Mom's coffee shop was shut down 3 days ago by the FDA because some stupid customer who couldn't wait for his tea reported them for bad service. He said their cookies were contaminated, but I can assure you that that is not true. Here, I have some to testify to that, Lumley said, and brought out the bowl of cookies from her bag. She took off the lid, revealing a few survivors, and placed it before Madeline, who was already chuckling. Lumley, Betty softly called out, smiling. Madeline took a dip with her fingers and began nodding her head as she munched on. Subsequently, she took in some more, and when it was over in the mouth, she sipped some water and then began. So, what do you need? We need a bastard's identity to bring him to court, Lumley replied, and then Betty added, I don't remember much about his face, except he was dark, and tall. No problem, we'll find him, Madeline said. Good, because I can't wait to sue him, Lumley remarked. Okay, first of all I need to know the full story, where this man came from, and what happened before he called the FDA. Yes, Betty replied and began narrating the incidents. Subsequently, they left Madeline to her job. She called up someone on the phone and asked about Betty's case at the FDA. If indeed there was an ongoing investigation on the coffee house, the person who sounded like a man confirmed that there was, and then gave the name of the one who had lodged the complaint, Alfred Cujo, 35 years old, and a contractor at the Ministry of Works and Housing. He was tall, dark, and of average weight. He seemed friendly, based on the headshots affixed to his employee form. Madeline had sent the document by email to Lumley, who checked it out on her smartphone, along with her mother. Madeline was to see him the next day, alone, to convince him to confess to making up the story about the coffee house. However, on meeting with him the following day, somewhere around lunch break, Alfred claimed that he had no knowledge of what she was talking about. He had never been to any coffee shop, not argued with any waitress, never reported anyone to the FDA. But Madeline was calm, because she had experience dealing with people like him. She smiled and then continued with her conversation. So, you don't have anything to do with the FDA, is that right? Yes, that's right, Alfred confidently said. Okay, so what if someone at the FDA were to say otherwise? The man looked at her, appearing a little angry now. He took in some deep breath and then replied, Madam, I haven't done anything wrong. So please let me be, okay? I need to get back to work. He began to walk away when Madeline blurted, Mr. Cujo, we'll be taking this case to court because it's a serious thing to tarnish the image of a business without proof of any wrongdoing. It's called slander. She spelled it out to him. S-L-A-N-D-E-R. Slander. The test result will be in tomorrow, and it won't be negative, as you already know. So I suggest you get your lawyer ready, because we'll be suing you for slander. That's all I came to say. Have a good day. She walked away while he stared at her, rooted where he stood. He was anxious. It seemed it had now dawned on him what trouble he could be in. It seemed it had now dawned on him what trouble he could be in. What trouble he could be in. Then, unexpectedly, he began to run towards her, as she was still within the compound, casually walking away. "Madame! Madame!" he cried, clapping his hands, and then she turned and saw him, and then stopped. He ran up to her, and then began with an apology. "Madame, I'm sorry. I don't know you. I didn't know you were a lawyer." "You didn't? But I introduced myself. I even showed you my cat." I'm sorry. I'm just so busy. I wasn't thinking," he remarked, looking distressed. "I see. So have you changed your mind? Are you ready to confess to making up the story?" He was quiet and in thought. Then after a minute he replied, "Madame, can we discuss this, let's say, during the weekend? I'm a bit busy now." Are you going to retract your testimony at the FDA? Because you know you lied. So either you tell the truth or we take you to court," Madeleine said, without an iota of friendliness. Alfred began to nod, and then replied, "Okay. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have reported them." "No, tell that to the FDA. Let them know that you lied. Then we can reconsider this lawsuit." "Fine. Tomorrow? No, Friday. Yes, Friday will be good," Alfred promptly replied. "So Friday, we're going to the FDA, right?" Madeleine said in a casual tone. "Yes, Friday." "All right, see you then," she concluded, and then walked away. Alfred stared at her with a frown. Then he deeply inhaled and then briskly walked away. When Madeleine got into her car, she called up Lamley and told her about her time with Alfred. He did confess, but not fully, and since it wasn't complete, they couldn't really use it against him in court. However, he had agreed to meet with the FDA on Friday to make a full confession, though Madeleine doubted this. Nonetheless, she had some good news. The result of the FDA investigation on the coffee house was coming out the next day. Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, a call came through from the FDA, and Lamley officially got the news that the results were in. Mr. Johnny, the man whom they had met at the office of the FDA, had made a call, asking that they come over for it. But Betty didn't go because she wasn't in the mood to. After all, she knew what the result would be. When Lamley got there, Mr. Johnny was waiting at the reception hall, seated near the entrance. He got up on seeing her and then walked over and said, in a calm but serious tone, Madame O'Kine, can I please have a word with you?" "Sure," she replied, and consequently they were alone in his office. It was a large room with shutters, which were down. Since the air conditioner was on. Mr. Johnny sat down while Lamley remained standing, ignoring his request to sit. "You said the results were ready. That's why I'm here. Can I have them?" she snapped, and he looked up at her and then gently shook his head and remarked, "You lived overseas, right? That's why you have influence." Lamley looked at him and then shook her head. Then he resumed, "You know, it's good to have friends in high places. They can get things done quickly. But sometimes You need to think of the people, because that job might be all they have. Lamley stared at him and wanted to speak, but she didn't, because now she understood what he was on about. Someone got chastised because he didn't do his job. Someone got chastised because he didn't do his job well, shutting down a business just because someone asked him to. Isn't the right way? Someone got chastised because he didn't do his job well. Shutting down a business just because someone asked you to isn't the right way. He should have known better, and for that she couldn't feel sorry. He handed her the result in a large brown envelope and then asked to be excused since he had work to do. Lamley smiled and then walked away, leaving the door ajar. Mr. Johnny looked up and stared at the open door in doubt. Lamley called up Madeline, informing her about the man's utterances, and asked whom she had contacted to get him feeling that way. But she didn't say, except that no one was going to mess with the business again. So what do we do about Alfred? Are we going to wait till Friday? Lamley said afterward. Well, I don't think so, because someone called. His lawyer, apparently. Madeline said. Lawyer? He's got a lawyer? Lamley remarked, laughing the way she did with Martha. Yes, a lawyer and a pastor, 2 in 1, Madeline said, amused. Oh, who is that? Do I know him? Perhaps you do. He's one of the big ones, and he's coming over to the office tomorrow, so you'll get to meet him, Madeline remarked, and that got Lamley laughing again, in a more gentle way. She couldn't wait to tell Betty about it, and called her up just a moment after ending the call with Madeline. Betty was awake now and preparing some food at the kitchen when her phone rang. She picked it up at the living room and soon began to laugh. She also wanted to know who this big man of God was that they were to meet tomorrow. She also wanted to know who this big man of God was that they were to meet tomorrow. The news of the test results reached Martha as she washed some clothes at home. Lamley had called her up right after leaving Mr. Johnny's office. She was surprised to hear that they were already in and gave thanks to God. Then Lamley told her about her intent to sue the man who had shut down the place. She was quiet for a moment, a little stirred up. Was that necessary? She thought, and then said, Okay, I hope it goes well, to which Lamley replied, Oh, it's going to go better than well, darling, believe me, this will be the end for him. Friday morning at 8 o'clock at the law office of Attorney Madeline Boyson. Alfred and his lawyer cum pastor showed up. The man of God whom everyone wanted to know, the man of God whom everyone wanted to know about, was finally here and ready to fight his case, as he looked serious in his speckless blue-black suit and dark glasses. He led the way into Madeline's office, while Alfred humbly followed, draped in a plain light blue shirt, tucked into dark trousers. Okay, so the pastor led the way into Madeline's office. He led the way into Madeline's office, while Alfred humbly followed, draped in a plain light blue shirt, tucked into dark trousers. He didn't seem worried, but wasn't smiling either. When he finally arrived, Lamley smiled and got up from her seat, ready to address him. That's the pastor. Betty stared at him, trying to decipher who he was. Madeline, on the other hand, was already smiling, looking amused, as she seemed to know him well. He was of medium height. Of dark complexion, normal dark, not too much, and with a nearly round head. He liked to dress in suit, as seen in his sermons on TV. But the feature that gave him away was his voice and choice of language. It was deep, like bass, and he always chose to speak in the local dialect, the most common one that everyone used, Chi. "Good morning, ladies," he announced, speaking in vernacular. "Welcome, Pastor," Lamley replied, before anyone could, sounding amused. The man stared at her and then remarked in a casual yet cheeky tone, "So, you are the white lady suing my client." Lamley went quiet for a moment and then glanced at Madeline and smiled. "Yes, I'm the one," she said, smiling at him. The man remarked and then sat down. "All right, Pastor, may I have your full name, please?" Madeline began. He commented again and followed up with a light laughter. "Don't you know me?" he said. "Well, even if I did, I still need your name for reference," Madeline said, and then he replied, "Reverend Kojo Nimo, General Overseer of No Weapon Dares International Church." "Right. So, Pastor Nemo, I believe you know why we're here, right?" Madeline continued. "You want to sue my client because of what?" "He reported something to the Food and Drugs Authority. Is that right?" "Is that it?" Pastor Nemo said, with faint agitation. "Is that what he told you, Pastor?" Lamley interrupted, amused. Pastor Nemo stared at her longer than normal, about a minute and a bit, and then said, "White woman, are you the one I should be speaking to? If so, just tell me so I don't end up making a deal with the wrong person." Lamley didn't look happy. She swallowed some saliva and then quietly breathed in. "Pastor Nemo, your client, Alfred Cujo, made a false report about a coffee shop owned by my client, Madam Betty O'Kine, who is seated here now. Mrs. Betty, could you introduce yourself?" Madeline said, and then Betty stood up and then replied, "I'm Betty O'Kine, the owner of the coffee shop, fresh bread, cakes, tea and coffee. We are situated in Dansoman." "Dansoman where?" Pastor Nemo bawled. Pastor Nemo bowed. "Dansoman, near the bus stop," Betty added. "Pastor, your client made a false claim because he had a misunderstanding with a waitress at the coffee house." "Pastor, your client made a false claim because he had a misunderstanding with a waitress at the coffee house," Madeline said, and then Betty promptly continued. "He came there around 6 to 6:30 a.m., asking to be served, but that is not the time we open. We open at 7 o'clock, and so we asked him to return at 7, when we will be open by then. However, he came much later, and then started harassing my waitress because she didn't serve him earlier on," Betty said. "Thank you, Betty. I'll take you from here," Madeline remarked, with a smile at her. Lamley was staring at the pastor, who seemed to be consulting with his client, Alfred, as their heads were together. There was some silence for about 2 minutes before Pastor Nemo responded. Lawyer, I have heard you, and my client says he made a mistake. He shouldn't have reported you. It was out of sheer anger and he regrets it a lot. So, can we please settle this out of court? How much do you want? I'm sure we can reach some agreement. That was the pastor, and he didn't sound the way he did earlier on. He was sober, as if finally realizing where this could end up. Lamley smiled, and then quietly cleared her throat. The pastor glanced at her, and she glanced back. Okay, so this marks the end of the 60th episode. The 60th episode of the story, The Power of Coffee. The story about Martha, who is 21 years old and a university graduate. She finished school but didn't have a job. But after a while, she gets one at a coffee shop. And eventually she becomes the owner of the place after the owner dies. By hard work and a stroke of fate, the coffee shop becomes the rendezvous for celebrities and all those who matter in the society. Then comes along Cassandra, who is a young, affluent entrepreneur, and she wants the coffee shop. Martha won't sell the coffee shop because it's her business, it's her life. So what happens? Cassandra acquires the entire neighborhood where the coffee shop is situated in order to build a chain of rental homes. This is the story of The Power of Coffee, and this is the end of the 60th episode. It's actually, no, not the 60th episode, the 60th page, but this is actually the end of the 61st page. Okay, so I'll be back for the next 10 pages to make the 70th page or the 71st page of the novel. See you then.